Welcome to today's explainer. All right, go ahead and settle right into the left seat, get buckled in, because today you're the student pilot and we are tackling one of the absolute most critical practical skills in aviation, mastering the invisible forces of the wind. We're going to break down the exact mechanics of wind correction, especially when we're flying low to the ground. Let's get into it. Okay, quick pre-flight briefing before we hit the throttle. We're going to cover understanding wind effects, overcoming those tricky visual illusions, mastering your turns in the wind, nailing ground reference maneuvers, and finally, the absolute golden rules for safe low flying. All right, part one, understanding wind effects. Imagine we've just taken off, right? We're climbing up and suddenly, boom, we hit our first block of invisible moving air. To fly safely, we have to understand exactly what that moving mass of air is doing to our airplane. So let's visualize a headwind. Say we're flying straight and level. We've got our airspeed, the speed we're actually moving through the air mass itself. But because that whole block of air is moving directly against us, it physically carries the airplane backward with it. The result? Our speed over the ground drops significantly, even if that airspeed indicator hasn't budged a single knot. Now, flip that around, and we've got a tailwind. In this situation, the air mass acts literally like a giant invisible conveyor belt pushing us from behind. Our airspeed stays perfectly constant, but our ground speed, it completely spikes. And when you're flying low, say 500 to 1,000 feet off the deck, that high ground speed is extremely obvious. The ground is just rushing by underneath you. Moving to part two, overcoming visual illusions. Because look, the wind doesn't just push the plane around. It actively plays tricks on your eyes and your brain. This is where things get serious, because it's all about how you react to these visual tricks. When you have that tailwind we just talked about, the ground rushing past creates a really strong illusion that you're flying way too fast. Your sheer human instinct is going to scream at you to pull back on the throttle and slow the plane down. Don't do it. If you reduce your ground speed to what simply feels normal to your eyes, your actual airspeed might drop right below stalling speed. No way do we want that. And on the flip side, there's the crosswind illusion. If the wind's hitting you from the side, you drift sideways. Your eyes will swear the plane is slipping or skidding, and you'll feel this massive temptation to just step on the rudder pedals to straighten the nose out. Again, you've got to fight that instinct. Stomping on the rudder is just going to make your flight uncoordinated and ruin your performance. You absolutely must trust your instruments here, specifically your balance ball, way more than your lying eyes. So instead of using the rudder, we use a totally different technique. We apply a wind correction angle, which you'll usually hear called a crab angle. Basically, we just point the nose of the airplane slightly into the crosswind, and we let the wind drift us perfectly along our intended straight line over the ground. If you don't do this and you just keep turning the nose to point directly at your target, which is a rookie mistake called homing, you'll just get blown constantly off course and end up flying this super inefficient curved path. All right, Section 3, Mastering Turns in Wind. Let's head out to the practice area and actually tackle the mechanics of turning this thing while the wind is pushing us around. Get ready for a real aha moment here. Take a look at these two flight paths. On the left, in zero wind, holding a perfectly constant bank angle draws a beautiful, perfect circle over the ground. But on the right, look what happens when we throw some wind into the mix. If you try to hold that same constant bank angle in airspeed, the air mass just carries you downwind. So your perfect circle stretches out into this distorted, looping track over the ground. To actually fix that distortion and fly a true circle over the ground, we have to constantly change our bank angle. It's the golden rule of wind turns. Your turn radius over the ground depends entirely on your ground speed. So when you're heading directly downwind, where your ground speed is at its absolute maximum, you've got to use your steepest bank angle to keep the turn tight. But when you turn to head directly upwind, well, your ground speed is at its slowest, so you need your shallowest bank angle. Which brings us to part 4, ground reference maneuvers. Let's take those variable bank angles and apply them to the foundational skills every private pilot absolutely has to master. The classic maneuver here is the rectangular course. We want to fly a perfect rectangle around a field, right? Well, we always enter on the downwind leg. Why? Because it forces us to establish our steepest, most critical turn right out of the gate. On that downwind leg, you are moving fast. The ground's a blur. You've got to think quickly and bank steeply, up to maybe 45 degrees. Then you roll out, crab into the crosswind, and turn upwind. Now, heading into the wind, everything just slows down. You have time to catch your breath. Your ground speed is super low, so your turn here must be very shallow. Let's look at the whole pattern put together. Notice the visual cues. You want to stay about a quarter to a half mile away from the field boundary so you can easily see it out the window. As you're flying around this rectangle, You're just constantly adjusting. You're crabbing left or right on those crosswind legs, and you're varying your turn steepness at every single corner. And all of this is just to ensure your distance from the edges of that field stays perfectly symmetrical, no matter what the wind throws at you. As turns across a road demand the exact same logic. You're trying to fly a series of equally sized semicircles on either side of a road that's running perpendicular to the wind. Just like before, you enter downwind, making your steepest turn. But the crucial difference here is the transition. The moment you cross directly overhead that road, you have to quickly roll the wings perfectly level and then immediately reverse your bank direction, shallowing it right out as you turn into the upwind leg. All right, final section, part 5, safe low-flying rules. We're transitioning now to the absolute, non-negotiable, life and death rules of flying down at 500 feet above ground level. Before you even think about bringing an aircraft down to a low altitude, you must complete the FREHA pre-descent check. Fuel, is it on the fullest tank and is the mixture set? Radio, are you on the right frequency to call out your position? Engine, are temps and pressures looking good in the green? Heading, is your directional gyro actually aligned with your magnetic compass? And finally, altitude, is your altimeter setting current? You gotta run this exact checklist, because once you are down low, your eyes need to be outside the cockpit, not looking down inside at your switches. And while your eyes are outside, your hand should be planted firmly on that throttle. Why? Because down near the ground, things like surface friction, uneven heating, and wind shear just completely magnify any turbulence. When you're flying low, you need to heavily cross-check your airspeed indicator, just to make absolutely sure a tailwind illusion isn't tricking you into flying too slow. And of course, check that balance ball to ensure a crosswind isn't tricking you into flying uncoordinated. When you're down low, you are basically hunting for invisible terrain traps. If a wind is blowing down the slope of a rising hill, it creates a massive, powerful downdraft. Your plane might be able to climb at 700 feet per minute, but if that downdraft is shoving you down at 600 feet per minute, well, you're barely climbing at all. You won't clear the terrain. Also, keep in mind that aeronautical charts typically only show obstacles that are higher than 300 feet. There could literally be transmission wires suspended 2,000 feet high across a valley floor that simply aren't on your map. You have to be paranoid. You have to anticipate them. Well, we've covered a lot of ground today, right? From the conveyor belt effect of tailwinds to the precise little dance of variable bank angles in our rectangular patterns. But I'm going to leave you with this final provocative thought. When you're flying low and the ground is just rushing past you in a tailwind, screaming at your brain that you're going way too fast, are you going to surrender to that deadly illusion and pull back the throttle? Or will you be the disciplined pilot who trusts their instruments? Keep mastering the wind, keep cross-checking that airspeed, and fly safe.